Canadian Solar's an interesting name. They were originally a Canadian company, weren't they?
It was actually Volkswagen that brought Canadian Solar to effectively German standards, German motor vehicle standards. A couple of years later, the German feed-in tariff came in. So all these German companies are now looking for solar panels. And
guess who they
go?
Yeah. How do you grow a solar panel brand from tiny market share to one of the big names in Australia? Haydn Fletcher explains his time at Canadian Solar, how he didn't just sell the panel, he actually sold the story. Now, this is taken from our longer podcast where Haydn and I sit down and discuss all things renewable. Now, before we get stuck into it, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel and, of course, to Greenwood Academy. And wait till the end of the video because there's a little bit of a surprise. Let's get stuck into it. So Canadian Solar's an interesting name. They were originally a Canadian company, weren't they? Yeah, and then got bought out by Chinese concerns.
No.
Or what was the story?
So Sean Q was the founder with his wife Han Bing, and they were living in Ontario, Canada at the time.
Yeah, right.
So Sean was working with another PV manufacturer. The name's slipped my mind, but it was a French business. And he was working there in the R&D, and he wanted to start up his own business. And so, as you do, living in Canada, what do you call your new business? Called it Canadian Solar. And what he had done was actually, it was quite an interesting time for him because the Volkswagen had put out a tender wanting a solar panel to charge up their cars. So after they'd been manufactured, they were sitting in a lot, mainly the Mexican plant, and they were sitting there, and quite often the batteries would discharge before they've been shipped and delivered.
Right.
And so they just wanted a small solar panel to trickle charge these car batteries. So Sean developed a product that was quite suitable, but he was going up against BP Solar and others that were around. And the guys at Volkswagen liked what he offered, but knew he was quite small. So it was actually Volkswagen that brought Sean's business, brought Canadian Solar to effectively German standards, German motor vehicle standards, to be able to manufacture and sell this product. So he was going to set up the factory initially in Mexico near where the product was needed, but Sean, being from Beijing, set up in China instead and started supplying Volkswagen these small panels. Just a couple of years later, so that was going well. A couple of years later, the German feed-in tariff came in. So all these German companies are now looking for solar panels. And
guess who they go?
Yeah.
Wow.
So by having this German automobile standard or accreditation, I can't remember what it was, or certificate, the Germans were like, well, you've reached that level, we'll back you. So we were able to start manufacturing larger products, selling it to the German market.
Wow.
And then bit by bit grew. And then you go into California, Japan, and the business grew organically from there. But the actual roots, the board, a lot of senior leadership is still based in Canada.
Wow.
With a very strong, obviously, Chinese connection and leadership there as well.
Wow, that's I never realised.
Yeah,
that.
and when I started with Canadian, they probably had around about 1% market share. It was quite small, and one of the early things that I started talking to people is, I don't quite, probably the worst salesperson in the world. I don't really go out and sell the product. I don't go out and sell the product. I sell the company. I sell what we're about, who we are, the culture, why we're in business. And so early days I would go around and talk to people about where the company came from and explain why it's called Canadian Solar. Because at the time there was a number of basically products being made in China and companies calling themselves a German name because they wanted to get into the German market. And that's how they started. But they were actually a Chinese company. But Canadian Solar is actually a Canadian founded company.
Yeah, wow.
And then set up the factory in China.
And do you think that helped in the early days with the perception of the product being exceptionally well made, etc., and all of that?
Yeah.
Because obviously now the majority of panels are made, vast majority of panels are made in China, but under pretty exacting controlled conditions because their manufacturing is quite brilliant.
Yep.
And they spend a lot of money on engineers and tool makers and all those people who are involved in production lines. So, you know, that's wow. Because there's always that's the thing. Do you think like when you're talking to people, is it the company you're selling or the people behind the company that you're selling?
Well, it's one and the other, really. It is intertwined. There's certainly the people behind it. I certainly enjoyed working there. Otherwise, I mean, I wouldn't have been there for 10 years.
Yeah.
Good local team, but also globally, a lot of really good people working for Canadian Solar.
10
at the
years
time.
you were there.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I flew by.
Which leads me to the question about your pilot's license. No, we will get to that. What was the business model for Canadian? Were they selling to, and now do they sell to distributors? Do they sell to end users? Do they sell to both? What were they doing?
Yeah, well, obviously I've been out of the company for a couple of years now, but originally when I started, the Canadian Solar's not just a panel manufacturer,
right?
And so when I started, I mentioned Daniel before. He was the boss of the Australian business, which included the development arm of Canadian Solar. So people knew Canadian Solar as the developer and as the panel manufacturer, and probably the developer more so initially. So I've come on board, looked at it's mostly through distribution or a handful of direct clients, but my approach with Canadian Solar was strong distribution support, and brought on a small wholesaler in WA called One Stop Warehouse, or OSW, that people know. They were just a tiny outfit in WA when we first brought them on. Green Tech had only just started. I started working with these two companies. And there were a couple of other distributors as well, but the other distributors were selling a whole range of product.
Right.
I won't name who they were, but there was one company in particular that had an ad once, and that's when I knew they weren't right for us. It was a double-page spread in EcoGen, I think it was, and it had 6 different coloured ice creams, and the title said, choose your flavour. And then under each ice cream was Canadian Solar, Trina, Jinko, whatever else, Suntech, SunPower maybe.
Right.
And I thought, well, if you're our distributor, how are you actually helping us by that kind of advertising? Especially if there's that many different products to choose from. So,
because that is a lot of products.
It's a lot.
I mean, you obviously from a consumer perspective or end user, I won't say end user perspective, an installer.
The installers,
they want to have some choice.
Yeah.
But not 6.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so for me it was about, okay, who can I find that actually wanted to work for us?
Yeah.
And not just take our product and dump it in the market, or actually wanted to see the value in it and go from there. And Green Tech and One Stop Warehouse were the 2 main ones. There was a couple of others, but they were the key distributors for us. And then around them, I was able to put on a couple of direct retailers that were always going to go direct. They weren't going through a distributor, and they would do a lot of marketing and selling our product. And then you'd have the installers going, well, if they're doing that product, then I can get it as well from a wholesaler. So I started to build it up bit by bit from there. So we had a couple of years of strong 150% growth year on year for about 3 or 4 years.
Wow.
And it came from a small, like I said, small market share to really quite a good level of market share, and obviously most people knew us at the time. So.